There comes a moment that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. Nothing collapses, no one leaves, no door slams. Life continues exactly as it did the day before, and yet something quietly shifts. Not because you made a decision, not because you became brave, but because something inside you got tired of holding itself together. You don't announce it. You don't even fully notice it at first. It feels more like a soft exhaustion, like the end of pretending that you're fine with things you're not fine with, like realizing that the effort you've been calling love has actually been self-erasure. You're still kind, still attentive, still careful, but there's a new silence underneath it all, a silence that wasn't there before. And that silence isn't empty, it's full of moments you swallowed, full of sentences you never finished, full of needs you learned to translate into something more acceptable. For a long time, you believed closeness meant adapting, adjusting, softening yourself so the connection wouldn't break. You believed that if you stayed gentle enough, patient enough, understanding enough, the relationship would eventually feel safe. But what no one tells you is this. When you keep choosing understanding over truth, you don't just protect the relationship, you quietly disappear from it. And the strange thing is, no one immediately notices. Not them, not even you, because you're still there. Your body is there, your voice is there, your presence is there, but something essential has stepped back. You start feeling it in small ways. You hesitate before speaking, not because you're unsure, but because you're tired of explaining. You listen more than you talk, not out of care, but out of habit. You feel close, yet oddly untouched. And that's when confusion begins. You ask yourself questions you never asked before. Why does being close feel lonely? Why does understanding feel heavy? Why do I feel calmer when I imagine being alone than when I imagine staying exactly as I am? These questions don't arrive as panic. They arrive as clarity, a quiet, almost unsettling clarity. Because deep down, you already know the answer. You've just been postponing it. The truth is not that something is wrong with you. The truth is that you outgrew the version of yourself that could survive on self-cancellation. And when that happens, closeness changes. Not because the other person changed, but because you did. The way you relate shifts. The way you tolerate shifts. The way you stay silent shifts. And this is where the story truly begins. Because when you stop shrinking, even slightly, the relationship is forced to respond. Not dramatically, not immediately, but inevitably. And that response will tell you more than any conversation ever could. At first, the shift is subtle enough that it can be mistaken for mood, a phase, fatigue. You tell yourself you just need rest, that nothing fundamental has changed, that you're still the same person, just quieter. But relationships are sensitive to silence. They notice when something stops bending, not right away, but over time. You begin to see it in the smallest reactions, a pause that lasts half a second longer than usual, a look that searches your face, trying to figure out what changed, a question asked casually, but charged with something underneath it. Are you okay? Did I say something? You seem different lately. You could answer honestly, but honesty would require naming something you're still trying to understand yourself. So instead, you smile. You say you're just tired. You say everything's fine. And on the surface, it is. The routines continue. The conversations happen. The closeness remains, at least structurally. But inside, something has already crossed a line. Because the moment you stop over-explaining yourself, the dynamic is no longer balanced the way it used to be. And here's the part no one prepares you for. Not everyone feels safer when you become more whole. Some people were never connected to you. They were connected to the version of you that made things easier. That doesn't make them bad, and it doesn't make you wrong. It simply reveals the truth of the bond. When you no longer rush to smooth discomfort, when you no longer translate your needs into silence, when you stop offering emotional explanations as a form of peacekeeping, the relationship has to renegotiate itself. And renegotiation is uncomfortable because it exposes expectations that were never spoken aloud, roles that were assumed, not agreed upon, emotional labor that quietly became your responsibility. You begin to notice how often closeness relied on you being flexible, how often harmony depended on your restraint, how often connection required you to go last. And this is where the internal conflict deepens. You start wondering whether what you called love was actually endurance, whether what you called understanding was self-abandonment dressed in maturity, whether what you called being low maintenance was just learning to survive without asking. These realizations don't make you angry, they make you still. And stillness is dangerous for fragile dynamics, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to apologizing for needs you no longer feel ashamed of. You can't go back to explaining why something hurts when you've already accepted that it does. You can't go back to shrinking without feeling the cost. And so the relationship enters a new phase, not because you demanded change, but because your presence changed its weight. You're no longer performing closeness, you're inhabiting yourself. And that difference, however quiet, is impossible to ignore. When a system feels its balance shifting, it reacts. Not always loudly, not always consciously. Sometimes it reacts through confusion. Sometimes through subtle withdrawal. Sometimes through concern that sounds like care but carries an edge. People begin to test the new version of you. They ask questions that aren't really questions. They bring up old patterns as if they were proof. They reference who you used to be in moments of vulnerability. You were always so understanding. You never took things personally before. I don't recognize you lately. None of this is said with cruelty, but it carries a quiet request. Come back. Come back to the version of yourself that made things predictable. Come back to the role everyone learned how to navigate. Come back to the emotional layout they memorized. And this is where the real tension lives. Because you are not trying to leave anyone. You're not trying to create distance. You're not trying to prove anything. You're simply no longer bending automatically. You're pausing before agreeing. You're noticing what lands and what doesn't. You're allowing discomfort to exist without rushing to dissolve it. In that pause, that single moment of not smoothing things over is felt as disruption. Some people respond by leaning in harder. They ask for reassurance. They seek confirmation that the bond is still intact. Others pull away. They become less present. They protect themselves from the unfamiliar by creating space. And a few attempt to restore the old balance quietly, through guilt, through nostalgia, through reminding you how much you were needed before. This is not manipulation in the dramatic sense. It's fear responding to change. Because when your identity shifts, others are forced to confront their own positioning. If you're no longer the one who absorbs tension, who will? If you no longer translate emotions into silence, what will surface? If you no longer take responsibility for everyone's comfort, what becomes visible? These questions aren't asked out loud, but they shape behavior. And this is where many people turn back. They interpret the discomfort as loss. They mistake resistance for incompatibility. They assume something has gone wrong, but something has gone true. You're learning to stay present without performing, to remain connected without disappearing, to hold closeness without self-erasure. That takes time, and it takes grieving, because part of you recognizes that some connections were built on your absence, on your adaptability, on your silence being mistaken for peace. Letting that go doesn't mean rejecting love. It means redefining it, and not everyone will be able to meet you there. This realization doesn't harden you, it clarifies you. You begin to understand that closeness, which requires you to stay small, is not intimacy, it's maintenance. And for the first time, you're no longer willing to pay that cost. There comes a moment when the tension stops feeling external. It no longer lives in conversations. It no longer hides in pauses or misunderstandings. It settles inside you, calm, heavy, unmistakable. This is the moment when you realize you are no longer waiting to be understood. Not because understanding doesn't matter, but because you finally understand yourself. You notice it in the way you respond. Not faster, not sharper, just cleaner. You don't rush to explain what feels obvious to you now. You don't soften your truth to make it easier to accept. You don't fill silence just to keep things comfortable. And the world doesn't end. The relationship doesn't explode. No dramatic confrontation appears. No decisive speech is required. What changes is quieter than that. You stop negotiating your presence. You stop preemptively adjusting yourself to potential reactions. You stop carrying emotional responsibility that was never agreed upon. You stop translating your inner life into something more convenient. And something very important happens here. You begin to feel the difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is when you disappear and no one notices. Aloneness is when you remain fully yourself, and some people cannot follow. That distinction changes everything, because now distance no longer feels like rejection. It feels like information. Information about what was built on compatibility and what was built on accommodation. You see more clearly which connections deepen when you stand still, and which ones weaken when you no longer lean forward. This is not a judgment, it's an observation, and observation brings relief. For the first time, closeness is no longer something you maintain. It's something that either exists or doesn't. You are no longer asking, how do I keep this? You are quietly asking, can this meet me here? And here is the truth most people never say out loud. Not everyone who loves you will love the version of you that no longer disappears. Some will try, some will adjust, some will stay, and some will fade. Not because you failed, but because the bond required a version of you that no longer exists. This doesn't leave you empty. It leaves you grounded, because what remains is real, and what leaves no longer takes pieces of you with it. You are not losing connection. You are losing distortion. There's a quiet fear that appears once you stop returning to who you were. It's not panic, not anxiety in the usual sense. It's the fear of standing in a space where your old strategies no longer work and new ones haven't fully formed yet. You notice it when you're alone. Not lonely, alone. The silence feels different now. It's not empty, but it's unfamiliar. You're no longer filling it with self-correction. You're no longer rehearsing explanations for other people in your head. You're no longer preparing to justify your presence. And yet, something inside you asks, if I'm not adjusting, then what holds me here? This is the moment many people confuse growth with loss. They assume that discomfort means something has gone wrong, that if closeness feels harder to access, it must be disappearing, that if relationships feel thinner, they must be weakening. But what's actually happening is something else. You're beginning to feel the difference between connection and proximity, between being known and being needed, between being chosen and being useful. And this distinction can feel destabilizing because usefulness once gave you certainty. It gave you a role. It gave you a reason to belong. Without it, you're left with something more honest and more vulnerable. You start asking quieter questions. Do I want to be here or am I afraid to leave? Does this feel safe or just familiar? If no one needed me to bend, would I still stay? These questions don't demand answers right away. They sit with you. And as they do, your sense of self shifts again, not outwardly, but internally. You realize that some relationships felt close because you were constantly monitoring yourself inside them, tracking tone, reading signals, anticipating reactions. That vigilance once passed for intimacy, but now, without it, you can feel how tense it was. True closeness doesn't require surveillance. It doesn't ask you to disappear in small increments. It doesn't punish stillness. And so you begin to understand something quietly profound. Being alone in your truth is less exhausting than being connected through self-betrayal. This doesn't make you detached. It makes you selective. You're not withdrawing from connection. You're withdrawing from distortion. And as that happens, your internal world becomes steadier. Your emotions stop swinging as violently. Your reactions slow. Your sense of self stops fluctuating based on who's present. You're no longer trying to be understood at all costs. You are allowing understanding to arrive, or not. And for the first time, your sense of belonging is no longer tied to effort. It's tied to alignment. That changes everything. And yet, this is not the end of the movement, because once you stop returning to who you were, and once you stop maintaining closeness through self-erasure, a new question quietly emerges. Not about others, but about you. If I no longer shape myself to fit, who am I when no one is asking? This is where the path becomes less relational and more personal, where identity begins to reorganize around truth instead of response, where desire, preference, and direction start to surface, not loudly, but steadily. In the next series, the focus shifts, not on who stays, not on who leaves, but on what begins to form when you stop negotiating your right to exist. Because the moment you stop returning is also the moment you begin moving forward. And the question is no longer, will they come with me? It becomes, what kind of life can finally grow here?